Since you walk up past my way, me I forget waiting for say. I tell my guys say I don't find me, but in the price already for pay. Oh, any moment I see you face.
Alright, let's jump right into this real quick. One of the common questions I get whenever I do a mix breakdown is, can you do this in FL? Can you do this in Logic? Can you do this in Pro Tools? Can you do this in Ableton? Whatever. It's a very common question, but the answer to that question remains yes. The principle is literally the same. You can literally learn the principle of mixing with one DAW and apply it to any DAW that you come across. Do you understand? The only thing you need to do is just learn how the DAW's interface works. But the principle is the same. For example, let's do this mix breakdown of this record I mixed in Pro Tools. This is a very nice song, by the way. It's done by a Sierra artist. It's actually quite impressive how they've done this record in a way where you can't necessarily tell it's from Sierra Leone. Like, listen.
Since you walk up past my way, me I forget waiting for say.
I mean, you can hear the trio, right? But the melody and the song structure sounds very, I guess you say Afrobeat. I guess say Afrobeat, which is very, very cool. Back to the main topic at hand. My mixing process is the same regardless of the DAW that I use. The only reason why I choose to mix in Pro Tools or I choose to mix in Logic is because I love the GUI, the routing system, the organization system. That's just it. I can literally do this in FL, but I don't like mixing FL, right? So let me show you my process again, like I've always mentioned many times over. First, I'll start with the instrumentals, right? I would actually even start with the drums most times. But what I'm doing to each individual track is making sure, first of all, that the gain staging is right, which means for any track that is too loud, I'm going to apply some sort of gain plugin to create headroom. Or for any track that is too quiet, I'm also going to use gain plugin to increase the level of that track so I can hit the sweet spots. And for Pro Tools, the gain plugin is this trim plugin here. For Logic, it's just plain gain. I don't know what it is for Cubase or what it is for Ableton or what it is for Studio One or FL, because I don't even mix in FL. But basically a gain plugin, right, to first of all start my gain staging, and then I'll use an EQ to shave out unwanted frequencies. For this kick, it's, I'd say, any frequency below 30 Hertz. That's what I've done. Sometimes there might be some resonant frequencies in the mid range or the highs that I want to take out from an instrument. This is the stage where I would do that. Another thing I need to mention is the plugin doesn't necessarily matter. It's the principle that matters. For some mixes that I did in Logic Pro, I used the FabFilter Pro Q3 EQ, for example. But for this record, I've chosen to use the Ozone EQ. Another feature I like so much that this EQ has is this gain match feature here. The gain match feature helps to make sure that you're not adding any gain at this stage of your processing. For instruments that are too loud, I'm using the gain plugin to create headroom. And for those ones that are too quiet, I'm also using the gain plugin to add gain so I can hit the sweet spot, right? Which is about technically minus 18 dB, but I choose to exceed that sometimes. And then once I've done the gain staging and I've shaved off all the unwanted frequencies in each of the instrument, I'm going to send all of that instrument group to my bus for processing. For example, we're currently listening to the drums, and all of the drums have been routed to my drum bus, right? And this is where I'm going to now use a compressor to manage the dynamics and glue all of the tracks together. And I'm using the Lewitt compressor for that. This is actually one of my favorite compressors for drums, right? This is an opto style compressor and it has very slow attack, so which means my transient can cut through in the mix. Again, opto type compressor, slow attack. I've set the peak reduction to 60 dB and I've set the gain to 30 dB. I'm doing barely 1 dB of gain reduction with this compressor. But yeah, it's very important to remember to use a slow attack regardless of the compressor that you're using when you're compressing drums, so you do not destroy your transient. All right, very important. Same procedure for my bass. Done gain staging where I need to do gain staging, and I've shaved up unwanted frequencies for where I need to shave off unwanted frequencies. And then I've also routed it to my bass bus. And just like drums, when you're compressing bass, you want to make sure you are retaining your transient. That's why I'm also using the Lewitt for that as well. And I've done the same thing with the melodies. You know, gain staging, trim where I need to trim, add where I need to add, remove unwanted frequencies where I need to remove unwanted frequencies, and then route everything to my bus and compress. Personally, I like to do my bus compression in groups of the drums, the bass, and the melodies. Sometimes I'll do drums, bass, special effects, depending on what I'm feeling like. But the idea is to do sub mixes for all of these groups of instruments, right? And then send everything to my mix bus or my master bus. Sounds very nice. So that's it basically. The principle is the same. For the instrument, gain stage, take out unwanted frequencies, and route to my buses. And if I was mixing in Logic, I would do exactly the same thing. Now let's go over to the vocals. The first thing that I would do is gain staging. So if I see that the vocal is too hard, I'll use a trim plugin or a gain plugin to reduce the level so I can get some headroom for the processing that I'm going to do. And then I like to add auto-tune to the main channel.
Where did you go, Sahara? Since you walk past my way, me I forget what him for say.
Right, and from here I'm going to route the vocal to the lead bus, and that's where I'm going to do the rest of the processing. And just like I would do in Logic, I'll fix any problems that I find in the vocals first before I begin to shape the tone of the vocal. Let me walk you through that same process again in Pro Tools so you can see that it's the same. And also in this mix, I'm using different plugins from what I normally would use in Logic for some processing. So the plugin doesn't necessarily matter, right? It's just the same principle. That's all that matters. But anyways, let me walk you through all of the plugins I've used for the lead vocal in this mix and show you basically how I took this vocal from this.
Where did you go, Sahara? Since you walk past my way, me I forget what him for say.
To this.
Where did you go, Sahara? Since you walk past my way, me I forget what him for say. I tell my guy say I don't find bay, but in the price I ready for pay. Oh, and the moment I see you face, I know say now you go make me crazy. And the way you dey wind that waist, me I have to take you back to my place. It's hello, baby.
Right, and back to the ideology of fixing problems first. The very first plugin on my vocal chain is the NS1 noise suppressor from Waves, and I'm not doing too much with this plugin. I'm usually just trying to just remove very minimal noise in between the phrases, right?
Where did you go, Sahara? Since you walk past my way, me I forget what him for say. I tell my guy say.
And then the next plugin on my vocal chain is a dynamic EQ to remove unwanted frequencies, aka whistling points. This time around, I'm using an ozone dynamic EQ for it. So you can use any EQ. The most important thing is you're following the principles. Fix problems first before you shape the tone of your vocals.
Where did you go, Sahara? Since you walk past my way,
and bypass it.
I forget what him for say. I tell my guy say I don't find bay, but in the price I ready for pay. Oh, and the moment I see you face, I know say.
I mean, you can hear the difference. It's very minimal, but very effective. Let's even solo some of these points that I've targeted, so you can actually hear the frequencies that I took out.
Where did you go, Sahara?
Let's go here for example.
Walk past my way, me I forget what.
You hear that sharp frequency.
I see you face. I know say now you go make.
That would be very annoying if you got to your compression stage and you still have that in your vocal, right? All right, so the next plugin on my vocal chain is the DSR. As you can see, I'm actually using the Pro Tools DSR. The brand of the plugin you're using does not necessarily matter. Don't get me wrong. There's a reason why McLarens are more expensive than Toyotas. But at the end of the day, they are both transport vehicles and you're going to get to your destination at the end of the day. The only difference is you would feel and look better in one than the other, right? But you still get to your destination. So as long as you understand the mixing principles, you're good, regardless of the plugin brand that you're working with. Right. I've set the DSR to HF on. So this is only going to be capturing sibilants on the high frequency, right? From 4K and up. And I've set the range to minus 15 dB, right?
Since you walk past my way, me I forget what him for say. I tell my guy say I don't find bay, but in the price I ready for pay. Oh, and the moment I see you face, I know say now you go make me crazy. And the way you wind that way, me I have to take you back to my place. Hello, baby. Where did you go, Sahara? Since you walk past my way, me I forget what him for say. I tell my guy say I don't find bay, but in the price I ready for pay. Oh, and
Right, you can hear that when I put back the DSR, there's a bit of sharpness on the high frequency that the DSR is actually attenuating. Now, the next plugin on my vocal chain is the Ssle 400 channel strip. Waves has their own version of the Ssle, and lots of plugin makers have their own emulation as well, so it doesn't necessarily matter the one that you have. Again, like I said, all you just have to remember is the principle. Now, if you look at the EQ, you will notice that I'm doing a lot of subtractive EQing, actually. On the low frequency, I'm doing up to minus 13 dB cut, around 201 Hz. And then on the low mid frequency, I'm also doing a cut up to minus 13 dB, around, say, I would say this is around 600 Hz, but if we are reading with the Ssle units, kilohertz. That's like 0.6 kilohertz. And on the high mid frequency, I'm also doing the cut up to -2 dB, around 3K. And I've mentioned this many times, that's where there's usually harshness in vocals. So you want to get rid of that before you get into your compression stage. But you have to listen to your own vocal to make sure that's where the harshness is really sitting in your vocals. And your vocals might not be dead 3K, it might be 2.5, it might be 4.5, whatever, right? And then the only additive EQ I'm doing here with this EQ is boosting up to say 3 dB, around 16 kilohertz for that sheen, right? For that sparkle in the vocal, for that presence on the high frequency. And that's because personally I believe additive EQing is only needed when it's really, really needed. Because when you attenuate a frequency range, you tend to get a perceived boost on the opposite side of the frequency range. For example, doing cuts on the lows and low mid frequencies will automatically make the high mids and the high frequencies sound brighter because you're already getting that perceived boost. Do you understand what I'm saying? Even when I'm mixing the individual tracks of the instrument, I will do mostly subtractive EQing to remove unwanted frequency. And I would only add if it's really, really needed on those specific instruments, right? If I'm trying to highlight a very nice or sweet part, you know, then I would just boost a little bit. But I do more of subtractive EQing. Let's listen to this before.
You walk past my way, me I forget what people say. I tell my guys say I don't find me.
And then after.
You walk past my way, me I forget what people say. I tell my guys say I don't find me. But in a device already for pay. Oh, and the moment I see you pay.
You can hear that we've tamed those frequencies in the vocals, and that would help the vocals sit better in the mix.
Where did you go, Sahara?
Right?
Since you walk past my way,
Before.
me I forget what him for say. I tell my guys say I don't find me. But in a device already for pay.
Right, the vocal sounds very, very precise now. You have to always remember that when you're doing this EQing and whatnot, you have to have your beats playing as well so you can really tell how the vocal is sounding in relation to the music, right? Very important. Also, let me quickly mention that I'm not by any chance trying to show you the best way to mix and master a song. There are so many ways to achieve great results. This is my method. This is what I've gathered from learning from a lot of people over the years. I might do some research tomorrow and learn a new technique that makes me switch up my whole process, right? But for now, this is what's giving me great results. And if you have your own ideas, share it in the comment section below. Let's all learn, all right? So the next plugin on my vocal chain is the 1176 Revision AE compressor. This compressor has some very, very nice unique features. This is an FET style compressor, which means it has a very, very fast attack, faster than an up2 compressor and, you know, very smooth and whatnot. But the main reason I use this compressor is to tame the peaks of the vocal mainly. So the compression is usually focused towards the loudest parts of the vocals. But let's talk about some of the features of this compressor. The attack goes from about 20 microseconds to about 800 microseconds. Right? So it's really, really fast. But there's also a special feature. If you look down here, you see where it says slow. When you select slow, it brings the attack to about 10 milliseconds, which is quite cool. And the attack and release knobs for this compressor actually works in a clockwise direction, right? Which means 1 is your slowest and 7 is fastest. I mean, except you select slow. And this slow feature is actually only available for this Revision AE of the 1176 compressor. You also have your release, 1 is slow, 7 is fastest. For most compressors, it's usually the opposite, right? And then you have your input knob and your output knob. This is a fixed threshold compressor, right? So the more input you drive into the compressor, the more compression you get. You also have a mix button here in case you want to do parallel compression, right? And then you have the headroom button, which usually I just set to like the default setting. And then you have the ratio buttons and the meter button. The ratio button is also different for this Revision AE. It adds a 2 ratio. The other revisions of the 1176 don't start with a 2 ratio, right? But this one starts with a 2 ratio. But anyways, for vocals, I usually set it to 4. And also the threshold points goes higher for the higher ratios, which means once you select a ratio 20, it basically goes into limiting mode, right? And the threshold goes higher. And then you have your meter buttons, which are usually set to gain reduction, so I can see the amount of gain reduction I'm getting.
Go, Sahara. Since you walk past my way, me I forget what him for say. I tell my guys say I don't find me. But in a device already for pay. Oh.
Right, so as you can see, it's really just targeting the peaks. And then the next plugin on my vocal chain is yet another compressor. This is the LA2A. The LA2A is an opto type compressor. That means it uses light that would go through an opto cell that will determine the amount of gain reduction. So which means the louder the signal, the brighter the amount of light that will go through the opto cell that will now determine the amount of compression that you get. Okay, it's also a tube-based compressor, right? So the whole tone will be from a combination of the the optocell, the tubes, and the transformers. But you probably don't care about that, so let me stop geeking out. That's right. It's a very slow compressor, so it's great for vocals, guitars, drums, bass, anything that you need to compress without destroying the transient, basically. There's not a lot of controls to bother yourself with. You just have the gain knob, the peak reduction knob, and the output level, which, you know, I usually just set to gain reduction. Peak reduction also serves like the threshold. So the more you increase your peak reduction, the more compression you get. This version of the LA2A also have a mix knob, which sometimes I would use to do parallel compression if I want to, but you know, I don't think I'm doing that here. And then obviously I've set to compress. It's also a limiter, so you can use the limiting function as well. What else do I need to tell you about this compressor? This compressor actually has a fixed ratio as well. I think it's around 3:1, but it's also frequency dependent. So that means the ratio might change slightly depending on the frequency that you're compressing. And for the attack for this compressor, I think it's about 10 milliseconds as well. So like I said, very, very slow attack. Then the release time is about 60 milliseconds for the first 50% of the release time. And the balance is program dependent. It can go from 0.5 to about 50 milliseconds of release time. But yeah, enough geeking out. So let's get back to mixing, all right? But yeah, it's a great compressor for vocals. And the role of this compressor in my vocal chain is to even out the performance and bring the vocals to the front of the mix. So let's listen to it before. And then after.
You go Sahara.
You can hear.
Since you walk up past my way,
right?
Me I forget waiting for say. I tell my guy say I don't find bay, but in the price already for pay. Oh, and the moment I see you face, I know say now you go make me crazy. And the way you they wind that waist, me have to take you back to my place.
So you can hear how it brings the vocals out, literally. But again, make sure you make these adjustments based on what your record needs, okay? Let's go. So the next plugin on my vocal chain is a multiband compressor. This is exactly how I work with Logic. But this time around, I'm using a Pro Tools multiband compressor instead of the Fab Filter compressor that I normally use. This is the final stage where I shape the tone of the vocals. With a multiband compressor, I can go into different frequency bands and balance out all of the frequencies so that everything sounds perfect. And I've set the attacks for the low and the low mid to fast attack and slow release. I've set the depth for the low frequency to minus 15 dB, depth for the low mid to minus 10, threshold for the low mid to minus 33 or minus 34 dB, and then the threshold for the low frequencies at minus 40 dB. Now, this is because I'm trying to really tame the low frequencies in the vocals. I want the multiband compressor to hold those frequencies once they exceed the threshold. Fast attack, slow release. This is before, right?
You go Sahara. Since you walk up past my way, me I forget waiting for say.
And then after.
You go Sahara. Since you walk up past my way, me I forget waiting for say. I tell my guy say I don't find bay.
Right, so if you listen now, you can hear that the lows and the low mids are very, very controlled. Even though you can still hear them in the mix, but they're very, very, very controlled. So that's the essence of a multiband compressor. So if you listen to your vocal and you felt like maybe on the high frequencies around maybe 3K, there's a bit of spike in the frequency range there, you can use the multiband compressor to attenuate that. Basically, the multiband compressor is like having multiple DSRs, targeting specific frequency range in your vocals. And then the next plugin, or the last plugin on my vocal chain, is an RDSR. I'm using these to capture any sibilance I would have built up due to all of the processing that we've done so far. This is my exact process if I am mixing in Logic Pro. And that's what I'm doing here in Pro Tools. I will do the same in Ableton. I will do the same in whichever DAW I choose to mix with, right? You can learn how to mix with one DAW and apply the same principle everywhere. In fact, I'm thinking of learning to use Ableton for the fun of it. You can literally do the same thing everywhere. So that concludes the dynamics portion of my vocal chain. And the next thing I do from here is start adding my reverb and delay sounds. If you've watched any of my videos before, you know my process is working with two reverbs. First, I start with a room reverb. The room reverb is basically a very short reverb to just create a bit of cushion in between the vocals and the instrumental. And I'm usually not even sending a lot of signals to the reverb. If you look at the send here, you can see that I'm just doing like minus 25 dBs. So before, and then after.
You walk up past my way, me I forget waiting for say. I tell my guy say I don't find bay.
The difference is very minute, but you can hear that the vocals stop being totally dry.
You walk up past my way,
let me exaggerate.
Me I forget waiting for say.
Right.
I tell my guy say I don't find bay.
Short reverb time.
Already for pay. Oh, and
short reverb time. And for the reverb, this time around I'm actually using pure plate. This is a UAD reverb, very easy to use. I've set a very short pre-delay time, also very, very short reverb time. I'm doing a low cut of up to 180 hertz. Set the mix to wet, balances in the center. Again, I'm not doing too much with this particular reverb. Back to the point of the plugin brand that you use not necessarily being a factor. track. A lot of records I mix on Logic, I use the File Filter Pro or Reverb, but here I'm using a UAD Reverb. So it's the principle that is the same. And then the next send on my vocal chain is to the main reverb before.
You walk past my way, me I forget waiting for say.
And then after.
You walk past my way, me I forget waiting for say. I tell my guys say I don't find bay, but in the price I ready for pay. Oh, and the moment I see you face, I know say now you go make me crazy. And the way you dey wind that waist, me have to take you back to my place. It's all love, you walk past my.
Right, so that's actually a very nice reverb. I'm using the H reverb from Waves. I've set the correct reverb time, the correct pre-delay time, and good to go. Just add as much reverb as you need. And then the last send on my vocal chain is to the delay. I'm using H delay. You can use whatever delay that you like. The most important thing is to remember that the principle is the same. It's just the routing system that is different from different DAWs. But all DAWs have aux tracks, all DAWs have sends and buses. So it's pretty much the same. And usually what I do with the background vocal and the ad-lib vocal is similar processing like I did on the main vocal, but I would usually maybe do more cuts in the low frequency for the background vocals, right? So that they're not competing with the lead vocals, or I might make it brighter, even thicker, depending on what the sound is. I would say for up-tempo records, I usually like to make the backup vocal just a little bit thinner because there's a lot of instruments going on, right? And you want the lead to be the main focus. I might also even make the ad-libs brighter as well, just to make it pop whenever it comes up, because you remember ad-libs are usually just like punches, right? So they come and go. But when it's brighter, you can really notice them. Also, I like to use a different reverb for the ad-libs and backup vocals. For this mix, I'm actually using Valhalla Supermassive for the backup vocals.
You walk past my way, me I forget waiting for say. I tell my guys say I don't find bay, but in the price I ready for pay. Oh, and the moment I see you face, I know say now you go make me crazy. And the way you dey to my place, oh.
Right, you can hear those very, very nice sweet stereo delay. Those are what I like to call ear candies, and they're very, very nice for backups and delays and whatnot. I'm actually using a different delay for the backups as well. I'm using this Galaxy Tape Echo from UAD, right? But again, just use whatever delay you have. It's the principle that remains the same. When I'm doing my mixes, I like to do sub mixes of the drums to drum bus, the melodies to melody bus, bass to bass bus, and I do another sub mix of that to that aux track that I just label beat, and I do another sub mix of all of the vocals and assign it to another aux track, and I just usually label Vox. This is where I'll do EQ matching if I feel like the record needs it, and before I proceed to my mix bus, which usually I just use as my mastering bus since I'm doing the mastering for the record as well, right? So that's it. That's the process. Okay, my process remains the same regardless of the DAW that I use. So if I show you something here in Pro Tools, you can literally apply it on FL or whatever DAW that you use. To be honest, I've learned a lot of techniques for mixing and mastering in stereo and Dolby Atmos from people that did not use the same DAW that I used. A lot of the information I picked up when I was learning to mix in Dolby Atmos was from guys that used Cubase. And in fact, my whole mixing technique that I've been using to work with for the past, 5-6 years were stuff that I learned from guys that use Pro Tools. And then I was using Logic strictly. I've learned stuff from guys that use Ableton as well. The principle remains the same. So if you stop yourself from learning from somebody because you think they're using a different DAW, you don't know what you might be losing. Very, very important to just try as much as possible to see past the DAW and get the knowledge and understand the principle. That's just what it is. So yeah, man, that's it. This is all I wanted to show you guys. It's easy to mix on any DAW you come across. Just learn from one place and apply it everywhere else. If you got anything useful from this video, make sure you leave me a like and subscribe and click notification bell so you don't miss out on all of the amazing juicy content coming your way in 2024, right? I have links down below to some very, very fun things like the Logic Pro recording template with the free Afrobeat preset in it. All of the plugins on there is stock plugins. If you just have Logic, you're good to go. There's a link to my engineers page down below if you want to book my services for mixing in stereo and Dolby Atmos, as well as a link to the Project-Atmos EP, which is my EP that I dropped about last year. If you've not streamed it, go stream it. A lot of people love the EP. It's actually a very nice, amazing piece of art, if I do say so myself. All right. And also, if you want to support my channel beyond your likes and your subscribing, you can now join groups on the channel, and I really, really appreciate it if you do. We have 3 tiers. We have Atmos Room C, B, and A, and if you join the Atmos Room Gang A, you get exclusive member-only videos plus 5 beats of full songs, mixing and mastering review from me monthly. Like, I would listen to them and tell you what's wrong, and we'll fix it together, because you are a VIP. This is your studio now. You understand what I'm saying? So yeah, man, that's good to be for now, man. Ben Macaulay, out.
You walk past my way, me I forget waiting for say. I tell my guys say I don't find bay, but in the price I ready for pay. Oh, and the moment I see you face, know say now you go make me crazy. And the way you dey wind that waist, me have to take you back to my place. Hello, baby.